Good morning, everyone. I'm Tracy Noah from the Marion Library Service, and welcome to our Library Through the Lens live webinar, part of our series of adult programs delivered differently. This morning, thanks to Fremantle Press, we welcome author, musician and screenwriter Dave Warner, whose first novel, City of Light, won the Western Australian Premier's Book Award for Fiction, and whose book, Before It Breaks, won the Ned Kelly Award for Best Australian Crime Fiction. Dave Warner first came to national prominence with his gold album, Mugs Game, and his band Dave Warner's from the Suburbs. He joins us today to talk about his latest page-turner, River of Salt, and forthcoming mystery novel, Over My Dead Body. Please feel free at any time during the presentation to type questions you have for Dave into the chat feed on your screen, and I will ask these at the end of his talk. Now sit back, grab a cuppa, and please welcome Dave.
I'll just unmute. Yes, thank you, everybody. And a big welcome. Thanks for having me today. It's very, very entertaining to talk to you. And I enjoy talking to libraries very much. I actually have a little show that I take around when I'm in other places. And perhaps one day I will get to South Australia to do that too. As Tracy said, my start in the creative world came from music. And music was a really important part of the novel River of Salt, and I'll talk about it in some terms. And in fact, the idea of the novel and where it came from is what I'll primarily talk about today. That's the sort of thing that I find most interesting in books, where do these ideas come from, and then how do you try and enact that idea? How do you try and get as close as you possibly can to what you initially thought of? What was your inspiration when you started? So my starting point with River of Salt was probably about 8 or 9 years ago now. I was sitting in my lounge room on a Thursday evening watching the TV show Mad Men. I don't know how many of you watched Mad Men, but I loved that show. I thought it was terrific. And there were a couple of things that really appealed to me about it. The first thing was that, as somebody who grew up through the 50s and early 60s, and being a child at the time of around that 1960 to 63 era, things were really, really impregnated in my brain very, very clearly from the world around me, from the way that adults behaved and certain things happened. And it was a very strong feeling of nostalgia watching that show. The art direction was fantastic, and it kind of took you back to the 60s, and you saw that so many things in America were not that dissimilar to what happened in Australia. I grew up in Perth near Fremantle, with a lot of bush surrounding me, but there was very, very many similarities between those things. The other thing that I really liked about Mad Men was that each of the episodes, while it followed the kind of story of Don Draper, the advertising executive, as the prime thing, he wasn't the only person. It was an ensemble cast. It was not just all about Don's world. And I found it really refreshing that each week we would kind of have a thematic whole to the story. And each episode was almost like a little short story, even though it had this spine going through it. And I really liked that. And I thought, I'd like to do a TV show at some stage that had that idea, where you had kind of a main character, but where each episode kind of had a thematic unity, and certain people from the ensemble came to the front, as they did in Mad Men. So I'm watching Mad Men, I'm thinking about these sort of things. And my friend Martin Cilia, who still writes a lot of music with me, we still write and play music. And Martin is an incredible guitarist, and his specialty is surf guitar, like Hank Marvin, like down stuff. And Martin was playing down the road from me in Manly in a little club. And he'd invited me down, and he was playing with a band called the Atlantics, who were a very, very successful Australian band back in the early 60s. They had a worldwide surf hit called Bombora. No lyrics, it was just the surf guitar, the rumbling surf guitar and the drums. And had been doing a bit of a tour, and by that stage they were in their 60s, like my age now. And Martin had joined them and was helping out playing guitar. And Martin said, "Come on down and see the band." So this quiet Thursday night, I walked down the steps of the bar. And as I was going down the steps, I still, my brain was still fresh from Mad Men. And then I heard the sound of the electric surf guitar and the drums. And immediately it flashed me back really vividly to the early 1960s, to when I was a boy of about 10, and to days when the world of teenagers was really exciting. My near neighbour who used to babysit us, myself and my sister, Nadine, she was a teen then, and it was exciting. She'd go and see Elvis Presley movies at the drive-in. And there was a whole grade of movies, B-grade movies as they called them then, and drive-in movies, shows like Gidget, Ride the Wild Surf, that were specifically kind of designed for teenagers to go to the drives in America. And of course they spilled over and we got that in Australia too. And as I walked down the steps of the bar, I'm hearing this surf music, and it just took me back, it just transported me immediately back to kind of my youth in 1962. And I had this sensation as I was going down the steps. I felt creative. I got the creative tingle that you sometimes get, or I sometimes get. And I went, wow, there's something in this. There could be a story of some sort, there could be, I could generate something from this. And my first thought was, and as I'm walking down now, I see the band playing. And my first thought was, this could be a really interesting kind of TV show, maybe something like Happy Days. Maybe you could do a fun, spoofy sort of show of that early 60s stuff where everybody wore the big bikinis and they're playing beach volleyball. And I'd done quite a bit of work in television and film. But I also knew at the time, I thought, it's really hard to get that, to get TV and film to take that on board. And so I thought, that's hard, but, and it would be really hard doing a comedy thing. So I'm thinking all this stuff as I'm watching and listening to the band. And then my next thought was, well, maybe you could do it as a drama. There could be something in doing this show as a kind of drama, and my specialty is crime. And I started to think, maybe you could do a kind of crime series set in the early 60s in the pristine world of this beach culture, which is all innocence. But underneath the innocence, there's a kind of darkness, and there's something else that might happen. And so that's probably about as far as I got at that time. And then I came back that night, and it still burned with me really strongly, this idea of what I'd seen. And I started to think about it, and I thought, it's probably really hard to get a TV show. It's very hard with broadcasters in Australia. They don't take much risk. And the sort of ideas that I was having would be difficult to get up. So I started to think about it as a book as well as a TV possibility. And I thought, okay, let's take this idea now. We've got a pristine Australian beach culture that I know really well. I know that era. I know my parents' era of that early 60s. I know what they used to do. Like all my mum's friends, you'd go around there on the weekend, the kids would traipse around and everyone would make a tuna mornay. That's what the women did. And it was an era where men were starting to network. They were into their Rotary groups and playing golf. Men had taken up golf. So I knew this era intimately. I didn't have to do any research for it. And I felt very emotionally connected to it. And so I thought, okay, what about, I'm doing this book. Well, I'm thinking I might do a book or a show. Who could my main character be? How can I get the darkness into this pristine world of the Australian beach culture? And I thought, well, you need a criminal of some sort who comes here perhaps, and he's trying to escape his past. you know, it's a fairly common type of thing to have in a book or a story. So who could that criminal be, and what could he be? And for some reason, it came to me, I was thinking, well, a hitman would be really good. You know, you could do a hitman. But in Australia, we don't really believe hitmen, you know, like most of the hitmen that we know about are stuff-ups. They get it all wrong and they're caught pretty immediately and they dob everybody in. But we do believe in hitmen in the US. And so then I thought, well, maybe that could work, because we believe in a hitman for the US. It's entirely possible that somebody escaping from the US in the early 60s, if they had to, maybe they would come to Australia. And so then I delved into that and I thought about who my main character might be. And I'm going to introduce you to my main character by reading a bit from the start of the book. My main character, Blake. So we start in Philadelphia, and I don't know if you can see that. You might be able to, River of Salt. And the first chapter is called Yuri. And that was because that early 1960s, Yuri Gagarin being catapulted into space was something that was very strong in my brain, the same as, and I remember around that time, Weatherly, the American yacht, beating Gretel, the Australian yacht, in the America's Cup. They were things that I remembered from that time. It's a fucking disgrace. This country has gone down the shitter. Holding the offensive newspaper with his left hand, little Joey backhanded it with his right, the same way he smacked around a numbers runner who hadn't made his quota. Al knew what was coming next. What had come next every morning since April, making breakfast even more stressful. Fucking Russians. Fucking Russians! There it was. Al nodded as if in sympathy, but in truth, he admired Yuri Gagarin. Admired anybody who could sit in a fucking tin drum and be shot into outer space. How many Russian cosmonauts are up there? Oops, sorry about that. Somebody who never rings me and just decides to ring me at that point. So I'll just turn off my phone here. Actually, that's my next book. It's my next book is a biography of a footballer, Marlon Pickett, who made his debut in the AFL Grand Final last year, and that was Marlon ringing me. It was ringing me at a strange time. So I'll go back to Yuri Gagarin. How many Russian cosmonauts were up there just floating around? You'd never believe what the Russians told you. Could be dozens. Mind you, given the job these last few months, it might be relaxing. Every bodyguard he knew had an ulcer. So far, Al seemed to have been spared, but perhaps that was because he hardly felt like eating. You couldn't put two hands on a burger for fear of a bullet in the back of the head. Bodyguard used to be a good job, prestigious. But ever since Carmelo had gone on the warpath, it had turned to shit. Philly was a fucking slaughterhouse. Little Joey should have distanced himself from Carmelo, but what Joey was thinking, erroneously, in Al's considered opinion, was that if Carmelo won the struggle with the Don, then Carmelo would come gunning for those who had been his enemy. Joey wasn't dumb. Well, not that dumb. He knew he couldn't sit on the fence forever, but he was holding out, hoping New York stepped in, said, enough is enough. You assholes can't sort out your own problems. We're taking over. In which case, he might be rewarded for keeping a cool head. Al smuggled a look at the boss slurping his coffee. There was a difference between being cool and being negligent. Refusing to change your habits, that was negligent. And who were the suckers who would pay for such negligence? Sam, sitting opposite, stopped scanning the doorway for a moment to meet his eye, thinking the same thing. We're the ones going to take lead, and all he wants to do is talk Russians. They've got women astronauts too, can you believe that? No point correcting the boss, he'd forget cosmonaut by lunch. Stubborn little motherfucker. He ate breakfast here almost every day. They'd made it as secure as possible. 2 guys at the back door, Caesar in the car out front, them in the booth. So they only had to defend 3 sides maximum. Including staff, there were 15 people beside them. The skinny guy at the stool in the cheap suit, some sort of insurance guy would be Al's guess, was there most days. Same for the college kid, looked like Troy Donahue with the glasses. He was always reading a book or a magazine or at a table by himself. Apart from them, a couple of secretaries grabbing a bite to eat, a henpecked husband and his wife, the staff who were mainly Polacks. Day before yesterday had been a bit of a scare. That shiver you feel. Two guys, heavy set in suits, walking in off the street. Al's hand had gone straight to his inside coat pocket. He'd felt Sam tense, the same. The guys that ordered ham and eggs and sat on the far side. In the end, nothing but the tension. Whew. They'll have a woman in space before we've even got one of our guys up there. Joey was shaking his head. He didn't even look up at the tinkle of the front doorbell, but Al and Sam did. A couple of guys looked like plumbers, no threat. Whew. Breathe out. You guys seen Arnold Palmer on TV? No, boss. Al didn't own a TV. If he did, he would not be watching golf. Golf had become little Joey's latest thing. The plumbers were getting coffee. Al watching just in case. This guy's amazing. The golf course was another place that was a pain in the ass to watch over the boss. Little Joey was a terrible golfer. He swung like he was swatting flies. Al was sure his boss hated it, but the New York guys had taken it up and the ripples had spread. Sam and Al spent half their time looking out for snipers and the rest of the time looking for Joey's ball. That's one thing the fucking Russians can't do. Play golf. Al's eyes followed the plumbers, back to him now. Sitting on their stools, the bell rang again. Al's eyes flicked quickly like the tip of a whip. Two guys in suits, same guys as the day before. He watched, real careful now. I need gloves. Why wouldn't he just shut up? Ricky says, ever since he bought gloves, his game has improved. I have to stop slicing. Some guys hook, I slice. Al sensed somebody approaching. He tensed and swung, relaxed. Only Troy Donner. Bang! If Al had the time, he would have congratulated the kid on his demeanor, his whole technique, his patience, and of course his accuracy. But he never got that far because suddenly there was an automatic in the kid's hand and Al knew he'd been bested, and it was the end. He never even felt the sting of the .22 caliber bullet being already dead when the kid shot Sam through the throat. Acting on instinct, little Joey picked up the newspaper to shield his head. The kid put two right through the photo of Yuri Gagarin, the only thing little Joey might have approved of, into little Joey's brain. And then he walked calmly towards the door. And the young guy who looks like Troy Donahue, who does the execution there, is in fact our main character, Blake Saunders. And of course, you know, it can be hard to try and retrieve a character who you know is a killer. But I worked hard on it, and I think hopefully by the end of it I retrieve him a lot. So we have met our main character, and we discover that Blake is a hitman. He's not a member of the Philly squad. He's not a made man, but he gets paid to do hits for the squad. He does it well. He doesn't like doing it, and he says to himself he should be doing a job in a factory or something instead, but he doesn't. He continues to do what he knows he does well and what pays him some money. But he does have other dreams. He dreams of getting away from that life with his big brother, Jimmy. And one day, he's walking out of the freezing cold of Philly up into his apartment block, and he hears this really weird music, strange music coming from the apartment next door. And he knocks on the door, and a young man opens the door, and he says, "What's that music that you're playing?" The guy says, "I just got back from California. This is a guy named Dick Dale. This is surf music." And from the moment he hears it, Blake is kind of hooked and transported. And what he wants to do from then on is just play surf guitar and maybe surf and get out of the cold of Philadelphia and the world of killing people. He wants to trade his gun for a guitar, basically. And he wants a life where he can relax and not be worried about other things. His brother Jimmy attempts to give him this life. He says, "Well, go to California. We'll do it. We'll get out of here, get out of Philly. Unfortunately, Jimmy, who usually does things wrong, manages to completely stuff up. And his solution to try and get them the money to get to California and get out of the life they're in is to rip off a haul of furs that belongs to the Dom and to the Mafia, which then puts him on the outside. At this point, Blake is brought in by the Dom, and he's told, essentially, he's given a choice. If you want to survive, look, there's nothing against you. We know you weren't part of this, but your brother has ripped us off. And if you want to survive, you've got to tell us where he's holed up. And so it's an enormous dilemma for Blake, but he chooses the dilemma that most people would, which is to survive, and he gives up his brother and flees because he's told by one of the other hitmen there, who's a bit of a friend. He says, look, I know at the moment they're not doing anything about it. You're cool, but sooner or later, you know, they always start to wonder. And so Blake flees and he heads for California, but he winds up in Australia. And in Australia, he ends up, the next time we pick him up, he's doing all the things he wanted to do. He's surfing in the Pacific every morning. He has this laid back life. He's playing surf guitar and he owns a bar restaurant. And he has a wonderful little setup there and a wonderful MC bar person, Doreen, who really fancies him. They both fancy one another, but of course, Blake is plagued by guilt. He believes he's not worthy of anybody's love, and so the last thing that he would ever do is to come on to somebody that he really cares about, like Doreen. And Tracy will get ready for the song soon. I'll let you know. So there's on page 33 of the book, there was a part I'm writing through where Blake is rehearsing a guitar and a song. And while he's doing that, Doreen's rehearsing some girls for the Watusi competition that they're having that night. And they're kind of both looking at one another as Blake plays the song. And to write that little section, that scene in the book, I had to have the idea I had to have the whole song in my head as well. And so I'm sitting there and I'm working out the lyrics, and usually when I write a song, the music comes around about the same time as the lyrics. So I'm working away doing the lyrics and the words, and I did it and put it in the book. And then I got to the point where the book was ready to come out. I think it wasn't quite published, but it was, it was all printed. It was about a week or two out. And I went, I'm an idiot. I should have recorded that song and just put it out with the book for fun. So I quickly got on to Martin Cillier, my guitarist mate, who's a sensational guitarist, and we recorded the song. We went in and recorded it. It's called No Good Can Come From This, and it's the song of really Blake thinking about the romantic possibilities that he might have with Doreen, but never knowing that, thinking, oh, if I ever sort of made a move in that direction, it would be a terrible mistake. And we recorded the song. It's on Spotify. If you ever look for it, look for Dave Warner, No Good Can Come From This. And on one of my library talks and a couple of little shows I did when the book came out last year, we did a live version, and I think Tracy might have it queued up, might have the link somewhere there on YouTube. Always feel free to go to my YouTube channel. And if you're ready, Tracy, we can pump it on.
From this. She holds my world in her fingertips, revives my heart with the sweetest lips. It's bliss each time we kiss, but we know no good can come of it. She lifts my soul with those eyes divine, heavenly body, lips the sweetest wine. It's bliss each time we kiss, but we know no good can come of this. Though her love is a waterfall, this man's heart is but sighing. She still thinks she can have it all, but she'll rue the day love came to stay. She holds our world in her fingertips, revives my heart with the sweetest lips. It's bliss each time we kiss, but we know no good can come of this. Though her love is a waterfall, this man's heart is but sand. She still thinks she can have it all, but she'll rue the day love came to stay. My heart beats fast to those angels' wings. Heaven lies here in forbidden things. I've tried to be strong, and it don't seem wrong, but I know not alone. No good can come of this. No good can come. No good can come of this. No good could come. No good can come of this. No good could come.
So there you have the no good can come of this. So that was just a little addition, and it was fun to do it. And I always, if I'm doing a talk, I say to people, if you want to get a real feel for what I was thinking, because the music was such an important part of how this all came about, have a listen to that. Of course, that's not quite surf, but it's of the surf era. Surf stuff usually doesn't have lyrics at all. So we've got Blake in his world, in his new Eden. Everything's going well for him, and then there's a couple of spanners in the works. One comes from a couple of guys who think they're tough cookies out of jail and from Queensland, and they try and extort money out of Blake. Well, they think Blake looks like a soft, easy target being an American, and of course Blake is called upon his former skills there to remove them. And then just as he's done that, to complicate matters, and where the book really kicks in, there is a murder up, a violent murder of a young woman up the coast in a coastal motel. And, you know, I'm thinking of those Psycho, the film Psycho, that kind of thing. So very violent murder, and a matchbook of Blake's club is found at the murder scene. And so what happens, of course, is that the police then come to investigate, and Blake is now in a difficult position because he's living here under a false identity. He doesn't want it to be known who he really is. He doesn't know what his status is with the mafia. He's taken off from there, and if they find out where he is, who knows? They may come after him. They may not be pleased that he took off. Things escalate when he's a suspect, but also some of his friends, and a close friend who's a bit of a drifter and a beat poet gets arrested. And at this point, Blake realizes that to regain his Eden, he's going to have to solve the murder himself. And so the detective, or the murderer, becomes a detective. Blake figures, well, who would know more about killing than me? And so that's kind of the twist of the book. and it follows through there to see how he goes. He tries to unmask the killer, and I had, I think, all three, maybe, yeah, at least three suspects myself who I'd identified at the outset as potentially being the killer, and I kept changing my mind. I did the first one that I thought, and I thought, oh, no, that's a bit obvious. I thought that was a bit obvious, and if I think it's a bit obvious, readers are going to. So then I picked another person that I thought could be good. I thought, oh yeah, that could work really well, but for other reasons, there were other reasons I didn't want to use that person. And then I settled on someone else. I thought, oh, but what about this? And it actually worked really well for me and surprised myself. And as I say, I thought if I'm surprised, then that's a really good thing. So I won't mention who the killer is, and I won't tell you much more about River of Salt, other than that I enjoyed reading it a lot, and I hope if you have read it that you enjoy it. Otherwise, grab it from your library or your bookshop. Now, this takes me on to the next book. You get 2 for 1 today. My book, Over My Dead Body, that was supposed to come out in July and has been put back to the end of September because of COVID. The bookshops weren't stocking and all that sort of thing. And this is, I'm going to read the first page or so, chapter 1, it's only the first page, and then I'm going to talk about, briefly about the book. Okay, so the first chapter, Switzerland, 1891. He had begun to accept the background noise of the falls was no natural phenomenon, but rather the thundering tears of gods. His own tears he had stalled, as ridiculous hope sprang in his breast that survival was not impossible, even from that terrific height. Long after the sun had collapsed, he had insisted they continue the search downstream by lantern light. It was too dark for a boat to be used with safety, though he would have risked it if his eyesight had been keen enough. They confined themselves to the banks, but were not rewarded with anything but chilled bones. When the others had finally left for the comfort of the inn, he had refused their entreaties to join them, paying the boy to stay with him just in case, for if he was able to manage some rescue, the boy would have to ride for help. Around midnight, the innkeeper returned on horseback with some bread and cheese and a small flask of brandy. This sustained him for a few more hours, but he had less glow about him than the lanterns, no appetite, his eating purely mechanical. He'd allowed the lad an hour of rest, and finally alone had sobbed with a volume of tears he would not have thought his body capable of producing. As soon as light had peeped above the mountains, he roused the lad again. The boy pulled evenly on the oars in a slow circle as instructed. They were able to use the rowboat for this more passive part of the gorge. His jacket felt damp. Whether because of the giant shroud of mist or his own lacrimation, he could not have said. The sun was too thin yet for warmth. At one point he fancied he heard the strains of a violin somewhere beyond the towering cliffs, and again he fell prey to that lascivious strumpet, hope. Stupid, dumb hope that was his dear friend, playing a trick, pipe in mouth, testing him for the sake of it. Another one of his endless experiments on the human personality. And of course I'd forgive him, he thought, so long as he were alive. But the scientist in him told him that was not possible. He plunged his hands into the water, freezing. A heart would stop beating instantly, even if the impact... Over there, he heard himself shout, and pointed so that the boy who had little English was given the direction. The boy guided the boat quickly. There was definitely something, a small dark shape in the water. To the left, he yelled louder, gesticulating. He reached over the side of the boat and snared it, though his fingers felt petrified from the contact with the chill lake. Now, as he held the soggy item in his trembling hands, he was at once weighed down with an iron melancholy. There was no mistaking that deer stalker. So we have it. Page 1 introduces my take on Holmes and Watson. And it comes from, the idea came from a movie idea that I had, well, a TV series and then a movie idea that I had back around 2000, and I finished the first draft of the movie script in 2003. And the idea was this is how the idea came about. I had a series, a little mystery series of novels featuring Andrew the Lizard Zirk, a guitarist, contemporary series, and his chauffeur Fleur, female kind of bit of Erst love interest, and Zirk the detective. And it was, fairly a fun kind of whodunit type series. I did 3 novels in that series. And I was thinking of doing a film at one point, and I was writing a synopsis for this. And as I was writing the synopsis, I said, oh, well, Zirk is kind of like a modern day Sherlock Holmes, except he plays the a Fender Stratocaster instead of a Stradivarius. And Fleur is his female offsider, she's his Watson. And I went bang, as I was doing that, I went, oh, wow, what an idea. Why bother with Zirk and Fleur? Why don't I do, what a great idea. Wouldn't it be great if I could have Sherlock Holmes with a female Watson? This is 2003, so well before any other American TV series. And I dashed up this screenplay with an idea that I had of a contemporary Watson, but the original Sherlock Holmes. It was a fairly over-the-top idea, but one of those ones like Twins that you could do that Arnold Schwarzenegger was in. And my idea was that Watson was a contemporary scientist, and she was the great-great-granddaughter or great-great-grandniece of John Watson. And she had found John Watson's diaries, and that's Watson of Holmes and Watson, but she didn't, like the rest of us, didn't think that they were real people. And she finds these diaries and sees that her great-great-uncle has perished in an avalanche, a polar avalanche, and she goes to try and find the body. And I had this idea that just like a woolly mammoth, you could pull the body out of the ice fully preserved. Anyway, she goes to do that, not realizing that the real story is that John Watson, her great-great-uncle, got seasick and left the voyage early. She finds the body buried in the ice like the woolly mammoth. It's perfectly preserved after 100-odd years, and it's actually the body of Holmes. And she gets Sherlock Holmes back to New York. Holmes comes alive. That was my original idea. It was a bit of a fun film idea, but with also still going to be some murder and solving some crime in it. And I took that over to the States with a couple of other ideas around about 2005, 2006. I went over a couple of times. So whether or not anybody took my idea, I don't know. Probably just a bit of coincidence, I think. But Sherlock Holmes and Watson, the copyright on that freed up around 2006, and there was suddenly a plethora of Holmes and Watson stories. And I thought, gee, I better get mine going. I better get this, really make some effort to do it. So I started to redouble my efforts to get it done as a screenplay. And then Play Me Down TV series came out, Elementary, that had a female Watson set in current day in New York with a modern day Sherlock Holmes. And I mean, I was just devastated and brokenhearted. And I just wallowed in self-pity for a year or two. And this happens to Australian creators all the time, especially in screen. We come up with great ideas, but because our industry is so small and pretty conservative, sort of big ideas are very, very hard to get up. And this was a big idea. So I didn't do anything about it, and I just wallowed in depression for a while. And then I thought, a little while ago, a year or two ago, I thought, oh, bugger it. No, I'm going to turn this into a novel, because it is different. It's not the same. I have my Sherlock Holmes is the real Sherlock Holmes. He's coming back. And so I started to think about it as a novel, and then I got freed up with a few more ideas, because I thought, okay, the weak thing is that Holmes just comes alive. So yeah, let's try and make that a little bit more scientific. What if when she was young, Watson had plunged through the ice and died for quite an extended period of time? She'd been dead but revived, and she's actually a scientist who's made this her specialty. She's looking to try and revive people who might have been dead for some time. She's not thinking hundreds of years, but just some time. And she's working on reviving hamsters who've been deep frozen and snap frozen. So her field is cryonics or cryogenics. So that was a thought. And I thought, okay, so she could be doing that. She could also have a father who was a New York cop. And so she's got an entree to the New York Police Department, and she becomes a specialty in she can help them in determining time of death for people who've been drowned or frozen for a while. So that was my kind of Watson idea. And then I thought about Holmes, and I thought, oh, she could go to the polar ice cap. But then I remembered in Conan Doyle's original Sherlock Holmes story, Holmes actually did plunge to his death wrestling Moriarty on the cliff of the Reichenbach Falls, and he plunged into the icy waters of the lake. And there was such an outcry from the fans of Sherlock Holmes that Conan Doyle brought them back. And so I said to myself, okay, what if, and this is where a lot of my crazy ideas start, what if Holmes and Watson were real people in my story, you know? What if they were real people? What if Conan Doyle was a conduit for Watson, who would tell him stories at his club, and then Conan Doyle would write the stories? What if Sherlock Holmes did plunge off the cliff into the lake? Being Sherlock Holmes, he was able to put himself into a kind of transport himself into a trance, so that when he hit the water, he was like a cat landing, you know, and his bones weren't shattered and his organs didn't explode. He fell into the lake and he was perfectly preserved in the waters of the lake. And what if Watson found him and for 30 years continued to preserve him in this frozen state and tried to revive him but couldn't? And so Watson goes to his death hoping that somebody somewhere in the future might succeed. And as fate would have it, his great-great-grand daughter actually finds his journals and finds that there's a frozen body there, and decides to see if she can revive it, and she does. And so therefore we have, in 2020, we have Sherlock Holmes back alive, prowling the streets of New York. And that was the starting point. There was a bit of a change from movie to screenplay, because from screenplay to novel, because in a screenplay, you know, you've got an external view. You can have somebody who's a main character and you can see stuff, but you're not inside their head as you are in a book. You know, in a book, you've generally got somebody's point of view. So I had to think of, okay, one, you've got this external, whose point of view is it going to be? That was the first thing. And the second query was, what's the tone going to be? Because whereas with a movie, you can get away with that fun sort of, you can have, there's been quite a few films that have a bit of a romp and a fun, you push the envelope of reality, but underneath them you could still have crime. It's a lot harder to do in books. So what's the tone going to be? And they were the two things that I've worked on with Over My Dead Body in bringing Holmes back into the 21st century. I decided that I would keep the tone fun in the sense that it's somebody who's come back from 100 years death, but also I would still keep it quite serious and dark. So there's murders that happen, and my next step was therefore, unlike with River of Salt, I needed to do a bit of research, and I contacted all the people I knew that lived or had lived in Manhattan and said, what would, you know, how do they heat the apartments there? How do they do this? And surprisingly, I got hardly anybody agreed with anyone else on lots of stuff. Some things they did, but loads of things they didn't. And the police structure was hard to work out. If something happened in Queens and then a second murder happened in Manhattan, southern Manhattan, who would investigate? How would all that work out? So I actually went to New York in December, pre-COVID, with the family, and had a lovely time. It was cold there, and I was able to check out a lot of these things for myself, because while the novel is high concept, I didn't want it to be silly. I didn't want to make silly mistakes. So I'm sure there are mistakes in there that aren't real, but hopefully they're not, like really outright laughable, that it makes it look like I didn't do my work. That's pretty much all I'm going to say about it. I hope you enjoyed. That will come out soon. I think it did sneak out. It wasn't supposed to, but it snuck out online for a while. So some people got some copies of it. But yeah, how it will be received, I'm not sure. Oh, the last thing I was going to say, in terms of the point of view, I decided in the end it should be primarily Watson's point of view. This saved me having to do a lot of, the brain fade that it would be for Holmes to find himself in a new world in 120 years. It was much easier for me to see that from her point of view, not have to go into his internals. But I did find about 2/3 of the way through the novel, I really wanted to hear his thoughts, and and especially as they got closer together and potential for romance, I thought I needed to get into his brain too. So for the first 2/3 of the novel, it's Watson's point of view, and then Holmes comes into it, and I think we discover a bit about his humanity, and one of the reasons that the novel appealed to me, which is because for people my age, the world is already moving so fast. Culturally, it's almost unrecognizable from 15 or 20 years ago. So what would it be like 120 years ago, and the dilemmas that people face? That was something that, in the sense, the humanity of the person, if you were placed in that situation, that really interested me. So that was kind of the novelistic exploration, while the crime story happens around it and over it and through it. And that's pretty much what I have to say on it. And but I'm very, very happy to answer any and all of your questions. And I hope there's been some food for thought. And please chuck some questions through. I think Tracy will read them out to me, and hopefully we've got 10 minutes worth. If not, I can blab on a bit more. How are you going there, Tracy?
Excellent, great. Thanks, Dave. Sounds fascinating, that book. So yeah, both of them do, and they both sound so different. I think we do have a few shy people today, but I've actually popped a few questions down here that I'd certainly like to know. So when you develop your characters, do you already know who they are before you begin writing, or do you let them develop as you go?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I was only talking about this recently. I was doing a masterclass, and apart from the series that I mentioned where I had Lizard Zerk in 3 books, the way that my creative process works is that I generally get an idea, a what if, and I think, wow, that could be a really great idea. And in the case of Holmes, it was, what if Sherlock Holmes could be brought back and be walking around now in the 21st century? And so what happens, I find, Tracy, is that I get the idea and I start working on the idea, and then I say, what character will actually do the idea justice? And so for River of Salt, Blake Saunders was my first. I thought, I need to bring darkness into this kind of pristine world, and so Blake was my first character. But who are the other characters going to be? And in the book, I did, in the end, while it's Blake's story through, I did manage to do what I wanted to do with Mad Men. In some ways, a lot of the chapters are almost standalones, almost like little short stories with a theme and with a character who pops out. And the theme might be feminism or racism or, whatever. And I did find that, that worked really well for me. And in obviously in this one, Over My Dead Body, the most recent one, Holmes and Watson are going to be the main characters. So that was slightly different, but they were characters in the context of the what if story, if that makes sense. So generally I start with the story and then I work out who will best service the story.
Makes perfect sense. Excellent. Just a comment here from Judith. So she says, great to see and hear from you again, Dave. Will you be returning to WA to release your new novel, Over My Dead Body? I'm a Bicton lady and our book club loves your books.
Oh, Judith. Yeah, well, I think I know Judith. And I grew up in Bicton, so that's good to have some local some local support there. Look, I hope to. Of course, I'll have to go, and I'm in Sydney at the moment, so I'll have to go and serve my couple of weeks there. But I would love to get over there, and I hope for all of us we get to a point where we can travel more freely and not have to isolate and do those things. But I guess it's going to be a reality of life for some time yet. Look, I would love to get over there, and I plan to. Otherwise, perhaps somebody over there, they might get the idea from you, Tracy, and do something enjoyable like this.
I hope so. So do real life cases inform your crime writing at all?
Yeah, they do. Not, I mean, I'm not somebody who goes out to do true crime, but especially with my first book, City of Light, and then with what ended up being the follow-up, in a sense, Clear to the Horizon. It wasn't really the follow-up, but it took the same character, Snowy Lane. And City of Light, I was really intrigued by the way that James Ellroy, the American crime novelist, used iconic Los Angeles crime cases of the 1950s and wove a kind of fiction around these crime cases. And so I decided to do something very similar in my first novel, City of Light. There were probably 4 or 5 iconic West Australian crime cases in the time that I had grown up there. And I set my book in the 1979 is when it starts, 79 to 89. So probably from the 60s through to then, there were probably about 4 iconic crime cases. And I chose to take those as touchstones. I didn't use them exactly the same, but they were clearly the kind of inspiration for these crimes. And I wove those crimes into what became a single narrative, but was obscured. And the reason I did that was that I found I had an emotional connection. Again, as a child growing up or as a teenager growing up, you know, these things affect your life. And I find that for me as a writer, and I would think for most writers, if you've got that emotional connection, it helps you write more strongly and gives you a greater veracity. So that was the first time. And then some people may be aware in South Australia of what was became known as the Claremont serial killers. I mean, South Australia, of course, is well known for having various serial killers, and WA, it was a little bit newer experience. And not long after my novel City of Light came out, that came out in October 1995. So 3 months later, January Australia Day, January 1996, the first of 3 young women, Sarah Spears, went missing from Claremont, a suburb which was 5 minutes away from where I had young women disappearing in my book City of Light. And so that was a really kind of weird situation for a start. And there were letters to the editors of the newspapers saying that whoever had been abducting these young women, which then went on for about 6 months or a year, had been reading my book. So that was a weird thing, and it meant I didn't really want to visit that kind of whole area much at all, even though the Claremont serial killer had such a psychological impact on Western Australia and on the area that I was familiar with, that it would have been a perfect follow-up for Snowy Lane, my detective character from City of Light. But I let it go for 15, 16, 18 years. And I thought, no, I won't do it. It's too close to people. I don't want in any sense for this to be seen as me trying to exploit this. And then there was a knock on my door here in Sydney. And I think it was 2015, about 5 years ago now. I opened the door and there were 2 guys in suits there. And I thought they were possibly selling me some religious literature or something. And I said, hi. And they said, oh, look, you're David Warner. I said, yes. They said, we're detectives from the West Australian Cold Case Crime Squad. And do you know about the Claremont serial killers? And I said, yes, I'm aware of that. And they said, well, 6 people have nominated you as a suspect. Could we come and have a chat with you? So I brought them in. They said, of course, you're very low on our ladder. which they probably said to all people. They came into my room here and interviewed me, and I gave them a DNA sample. And after that, I thought, you know, this case is almost kind of pursuing me. It's like, this is a logical thing for me to do. I'm very close to this case, and now I shouldn't ignore it, because in this 18 years, no one had come forward, no one had been charged. And so I started working on a new novel that called Clear to the Horizon, that could bring Snowy Lane back, and that would touch on the abduction of these 3 young women. And I thought I'll look at this from the aspect of the people, the investigators who failed over 20 years, and the parents. I'll look at it from their point of view. That'll be the thrust of it. So I won't be giving oxygen to the serial killer. And that was the point of view I took on that. And I was about a third of the way through the book, and I'd read the basic literature that had come from just newspapers and things on the Claremont serial killer case. And there had been an abduction and a rape in Karrakatta Cemetery, just 5 minutes away from where the girls had gone missing. And that had happened about 3 years before. And I thought, oh, this was in the real case I'm talking. I said, this sounds like the precursor crime. So in my fictional case, I will have Snowy Lane, my detective, is going to focus on that, which he did. And he focused on, and it looked like it came to a dead end, and Snowy feels down. He thinks he's failed. But in actual fact, he was on the right track. Well, I was a third of the way into the book, and I'd just written that section when it was revealed that the police in the real case had actually matched DNA from Karrakatta rape to one of the murder victims. So that was a case of art imitating life, and then life imitating art again. And anyway, I finished the book, and I thought I better get through the book and finish this quickly, because I don't know when so they might be onto something here. And I think I'd finished the book in September, and then they arrested a suspect in December who's been on trial and awaiting sentencing now to see whether, guilty or innocent. Bradley Edwards. I don't know his second name. Could be wrong there.
Wow. And you're right, we do have plenty of iconic crime inspiration you can take from here in SA. But yeah, I do actually remember that those Claremont killings. So I'm glad they've caught up with that person. Speaking of City of Light, your first book, how did publishing that one change your process of writing?
Yes, well, the first one that I did, I had no idea. I'd never done a writing course, and so I just started at page 1 and began writing. And this meant, and at that time I was still touring with the band and doing other things, and so I'd go away and tour for a few weeks or a month, and I'd be reading some book while I was away, and I'd come back to my little novel that I was writing and find that it sounded, I'd start to write and it sounded just like the book that I'd just read. I was being a chameleon and adapting. So from then on, I realised it was a good idea. That organic process was quite slow. It was great in some ways because you're never quite sure where you're going, and so it does have some real advantages. But the disadvantage that it has is that it takes you a lot longer, and you're constantly having to retoil. So what I tend to do now is I will map out the story just in fairly simple beats, but at least I'll have an idea from beginning to an end. They will expand and change over time, but I will have a kind of spine, a skeleton of a story that I will work through and expand as I go. And I think that that's a much more efficient way to work than my original organic process.
Great. And do you have many unpublished or half-finished books that you've written in the past?
Yeah, quite a few. So I've got, at any one stage, I've got a couple that I'm seriously working on, and a number of other things that I would like to do that both my agent, whenever they've or publisher, never seem to appreciate my attempts at literary novels or other ones. But I am working. There's one that I've been working on for about 30 years. So I hope to get that you know, I've done my draft, but everyone seems to think it's too dense and unpublishable. So, but I will at some point, hopefully, turn my attention and do that, even if I put it out myself, you know, and other stories too that come forward of different styles of things. I'd quite like doing some fun kind of youth, young adult romps, you know. So I've got a couple of things there that I'm working on, and at the moment, one crime novel that I'd started and then and was well into, and then out of the blue, this biography came along, and that's kind of taken my entire attention for 4 months, because it's been a very quick process. And so that will, I think, Marlon's biography, Belief, will come out in about November, I think. So I'll have a couple of books out in fairly short span of time.
Excellent. Look forward to those, and maybe you'll join us again to introduce us to those as well.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure.
With your music, so are you currently writing music, and will you be releasing an album in the near future as well?
Yeah, quite likely. It was a long time between drinks for me for doing a completely new album, but I did in 2017. I did an album called When, and then I'd promised my wife, who's a singer, that was her singing on the video clip there, and who for many years has worked with Martin and myself and my other musician friends. I'd promised to do her album, and we had done that. It's kind of country rock album, and that came out. We had some great promo for it, and it went really well. And she'd been very patient to wait 20 years to get her album out. And the week of the release was the week that they banned all live performances in New South Wales, COVID and stuff. So that's just sitting on the shelf there. So I suspect that when I come back the next time, I'll probably have to put that as the priority and make sure that we get out and do her album, do a few gigs. But I continue to write songs and music, and I'm also working on a kind of an audio book autobiography too, that'll have the songs that I've written and other things, and plays and musical plays. I'm working on that as well. At the moment, I've got something, a bit of an idea for something that I've been working on for about 2 or 3 months. So yeah, plenty of projects there. Just getting the time to do them, Tracy, can get a bit hard.
Yeah, you certainly sound very busy. So yeah, we'll finish up with one last question. We like to always ask this one at the end if we can. So who are you reading at the moment, and what authors, if any, have been an inspiration to you?
Well, at the moment, I'm reading I'm actually rereading Gunter Grass, and who's an inspiration for me. I tend to read, I don't read a lot of literary novels anymore. I tend to reread novels that I've really enjoyed in the past. So I reread The Tin Drum, or Moby Dick, or Thomas Pynchon stuff. So that for my literary things. But as far as the other stuff, crime novels, loads of inspirations. Henning Mankell, I mentioned. Elmore Leonard, I really like his humorous stuff. James Ellroy. I read my fellow authors from Fremantle Press. There's a little crime stable of us there, and Alan Carter, David Wish-Wilson, and myself, and that's expanding, that little stable, so I read them. And I'd have to give a plug to a friend of mine who goes by the pen name of FX Holden, who writes these fantastic action adventure. I don't know if any people out there are into action adventure, but he's an Aussie guy now living in Denmark, and he actually won the Banjo Award last year for his literary novel. So Tim Slee's his name, and he some people might have, TJ Slee I think is his published name, they might have got that book, or it's probably in the library there. Can't remember the name of that, offhand, but I like his action adventure stuff, and that's under FX Holden, and it's really great stuff. If anybody likes that Tom Clancy kind of, full on escapism, weaponry, etc., he's great at it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll check that out if we've got that in our library.
Yeah.
And Sally has just put a message on saying thanks for talking to us, and she's just read and enjoyed City of Light.
Oh,
and
terrific.
Certainly going back to Judith's comment about her book clubs, loving your books. I actually run all the book clubs here at City of Marion Library, and I think I will purchase your books and let our book clubs enjoy those too.
Oh, please do, Tracy. And anytime people can contact me via my website and stuff, I'm always happy to hear. You know, one of the great differences when you're playing music, you have a very immediate and intimate response with your audience. But when you're writing books, you don't. You know, you might get a little bit of feedback, you know, back. But I've got a Facebook page and website, and there's ways people can contact me or get on the list, and I'm always happy if someone drops me a line and says, oh, what did you mean by that, or what did you do this, or even if they want me to sign a bit of paper that they can paste into the front of the book if they really like it. All of that, I'm more than happy to do that. And yeah, I hope the Marion Library, I hope I get on there reading in the book club and that people enjoy it.
I'll certainly make sure you do, and thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
what is your Facebook page if people would like to follow you?
Oh, look, if they just look for David Warner, I can't tell you offhand what it is, so I could probably email it to you, Tracy. I can't remember what the actual, link line is, but
Yep.
there's one Dave Warner is my fan page, and that's probably the easiest one. So Dave Warner, look for that if you can. There's probably a few Dave Warners around, but it's got a little photo of me as a musician when I was younger, so they might.
Excellent. I'm sure we'll find it. Okay. So thank you once again, Dave, for
Pleasure,
joining us
Tracy.
this morning, all the way from Sydney, and for sharing your latest novels with us and your absolutely fascinating background in music and TV and the inspiration behind your writing. So yeah, it's been a great morning. And Dave's books can be purchased online directly from the publisher at www.fremantlepress.com.au and at all of your local bookshops. So please also support local. And please keep following the Marion Library's Facebook page, City of Marion website, and check your inbox to be kept up to date on all of the upcoming Library Through the Lens presentations and workshops. And if you haven't already registered, on the 2nd of September, we welcome another wonderful Fremantle Press special guest author, Antonio Beauty, to acknowledge Indigenous Literacy Day as he talks to us about his book, A Stolen Life. So we hope you'll join us then, and thank you once again, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.